Hey everyone, this is Finn, and in this video we are going to continue programming with triggers and colliders using OnCollision functions and OnTrigger functions. First, I'm going to show you an alternative way to opening up your project. You are going to want to open up your first project test folder. As you can see here, I have mine. It has an assets folder, a library folder, a logs folder, packages folder, and project settings folder. Double-click to open the Assets folder, and inside of there you will see 3 folders and 3 meta files: Animations, Physics Materials, and Scenes. If you don't remember, aside from Scenes, these are the folders that I created manually in my project. Go ahead and double-click on Scenes, and then open up your sample scene by double-clicking this item here called Sample Scene with this little Unity icon. And now it'll bring up our project. Alright, here we are at the sample scene, and as you can see, this is the scene where I taught you about game objects, colliders, and rigid bodies. We have our ball up here, our ramp, and our floor game objects. And just to recap what our scene does right now, I'm going to press play. We have a physics material on both the ramp and the ball to make it bouncy. To begin, I'm going to create a scripts folder. Let's right-click in this area over here in our assets folder under our project workspace, create folder, and name it scripts. Double-click on that folder to open it, right-click, create C# script, and we are going to make sure not to use any special characters or spaces while we name our script. Let's name it Ball Collision Script. Enter, and then double click this icon in order to bring up Visual Studio. And to give a quick recap of all of the containers of a script, when you start, it is the using or import section up at the top, where you import all of the libraries that you need for this script. The public class, which is it's named after your script, and it contains everything inside of your script. It's defined by these 2 squiggly brackets here. Here's the opening, and here's the closed. And inside of them, we have the start function and the update function. These are just containers, and whatever you put inside of them will occur either at the start for the start function or once per frame for the update function. If you need more of a recap on these things, go ahead and rewatch the Hello World tutorial. Now I'm going to click back to our Unity project and double click on this ball. And to recap, we have a sphere collider, which perfectly wraps around our sphere, and a rigid body, which uses gravity. And everything inside of this component are the default values. We just added a rigid body to this object. Since we have a collider, we can use OnCollision functions to program with this ball. To demonstrate that, I am going to first start by creating a print statement that will appear on our console whenever our ball collides with another collider. In this case, we want it to be our ramp. First, let's go back to our code, and outside of the start and update function, but inside of this public class container, so inside of these 2 brackets here, you are going to want to type void on collision, and as you see, there are multiple functions that come up in a suggested list. We have OnCollision enter, OnCollision exit, OnCollision stay, And then there's also on particle collision, but we are not going to worry about that right now. We are just going to worry about these three. And of course, we are not going to be pressing the 2D variants because we are working in 3D right now. Let's press OnCollision Enter. Inside of there, let's start typing if, and then open up some parentheses. Once you press the open parentheses, it'll add the close parentheses. And then after that, press Shift and press the bracket key to get your squiggly bracket. As you see, it is going to add the closing bracket as well. With your cursor inside of there, just before the closing bracket, press Enter, and it is going to move your container down. This is what we call in programming an if statement. That red squiggly line there is because I have not finished the if statement. It needs some kind of condition on the inside. And so what we are going to say is simply if, and then in the parentheses, collision, add an exclamation mark and an equals symbol, and that combination of characters there, the exclamation mark and the equal symbol, means does not equal. We'll get into parameters at a different time, but all you need to know is OnCollision Enter has a parameter. It creates a parameter right here called collision, and it is of the type collision, and it basically means whatever the collision is, it's characterized by this word, collision. So if collision does not equal null, and null means empty or nothing is in there. To translate, this container means if the collision is not empty, if we did collide with another object with a collider, our object did collide with another object, and our collision is not returning empty, whatever is written inside of this if statement, inside of these two brackets, will then happen. And in this case, we want it to print to our console. So let's write print. If I press enter, that'll accept whatever the suggested function was. I already typed it out, so I didn't really need to do that, but the suggestions are very helpful for when you need to do things faster. Add a beginning parenthesis and a semicolon, and then go back, place your cursor inside of those parentheses, and add 2 quotation marks, and inside of those quotation marks, type the ball has entered something. For now, we are going to make it so that it's not specific to just the ramp. If the ball has entered anything with a collider, it's going to say this. In fact, let's make it more specific. I'm going to go back and say the ball has entered. Make sure that I leave a space after that, because we want there to be a space in between this first part of the print string. This text in here that has quotation marks around it, that is called a string because it is text. It is letters and such, as opposed to numbers. After that closing quotation mark, add a plus symbol, and then type collision dot or period game object, and that is going to reach the collision's game object, and then type dot or period again name. Now whenever we collide with an object with a collider, it is going to report back its game object's name to us. Let's press Ctrl S to save our script, go back to our project, and let's press play and see what happens. The moment of collision, we should get that print statement. That didn't do anything, and I know why. I actually forgot that we need to attach our script to our game object. So if you are finding that your script is not working, definitely, first things first, check to make sure that your script is actually attached to your game object. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to click and drag over to ball, or I can even go all the way over here to the list of components in the inspector and release. Now our script is attached to the ball. Press Ctrl S to save and press your play button, and let's see it work now. There you go. It says the ball has entered, and then it says ramp because it's our ramp game object right here. Now let's go back to our script. Under the OnCollision enter function, outside of these squiggly brackets here, right underneath, I want you to start typing void OnCollision, and then I want you to go down and notice how OnCollision enter no longer pops up on our suggested list, and that's because we've already used it in this script. Click OnCollision exit. Now, to save some time, let's go ahead and take this if statement inside of OnCollision enter, click starting with if, and drag to this closing bracket, this closing squiggly bracket. Press Ctrl C. Make sure you are now clicked inside of the OnCollision exit function and press Ctrl V. Since collision is the same name for the parameter that's being made in OnCollision exit, we don't need to change this here, but what we do want to change is the print statement and the text inside of it, because instead of knowing when the ball has entered, we want to know when it has exited. That is what this function does. This function will cause a print statement to appear in our console whenever our ball has left the ramp or any other object's collider. Just like OnCollision enter means this print statement occurred at the moment that the ball touched the actual ramp, the moment that it collided with that ramp. This is going to happen and tell us when it exits. The ball has exited, and then it'll also say the name. Now let's go back to our project and see. I'm going to clear my console, press play, and now we should get two print statements, one for when it enters and one for when it exits. I have a feeling that we did not save, so let's press Ctrl S. Now let's press play. There we go. Common mistake, not saving, but please make sure that you're saving your scripts. Now we got two statements, one for when the ball entered the ramp and one for when the ball exited the ramp. Now let's explore the last collision function. Start typing void OnCollision stay, and now this one is a little different. This function is going to trigger every frame that the ball is touching the collider. Let's go ahead and grab this if statement once again from the function above it. Click in the middle of the OnCollision stay function, copy and paste. And let's change the print statement from saying the ball has exited to the ball is inside, and then it'll also say collision.gameObject.name. It'll tell us the name of the game object. Press Ctrl S to make sure you saved. We should see at least 3 print statements here when we press play next. Maybe even 4, depending on how long the ball is in contact with the ramp. I will show you what I mean in a moment. Since we bounced right off of the ramp, it might be only 1 or 2, but if we rolled on the ramp, it'll be different. I will show you that after, but let's press play and see how long we're actually on the ramp for. Alright, so it looks like we are not on it for very long at all, but I am going to go over, I'm going to click this little drop down arrow, click on ramp, and over here under box collider, we're in the box collider component, and next to material, we are going to click where it says bouncy ball and select none, Now let's see how long it spends time on the ramp for. I'll press Ctrl S and play. Okay, because we didn't fly right off of the stage, this time, no, we did not see a stay function. No, we didn't see our the ball is inside print, but we did see when it entered and exited the floor, because it bounced on the floor and bounced off. Now let's take the material for the bouncy ball off of the ball as well. Click bouncy ball. Click by this little circle icon here and select none. Now there is no physics material, and let's press play. Now, as you can see, we're getting many print statements when it is staying in contact with the collider. I'll press play again to exit play mode. Let's see what happened. Our ball entered the ramp. It did that once. It was inside of the ramp collider, and by inside I mean it was colliding. I used maybe poor choice of words there. What I meant was it's colliding with the ramp, and then it enters the floor and then exits the ramp near the same exact time. The ball is colliding with the floor collider, and then it exits the floor collider at the end there. You can see there is 261 print messages, which means for 261 frames, the ball was inside of the floor collider. I'm going to go back to my code, and I am actually going to write, after collision.gameObject.name, I'm going to type the plus symbol, and then open up two quote symbols again, two quotation marks, and I'm going to type space and collider. Actually, before the space, I'm going to type apostrophe S. That way, it's going to say ramps collider. The ball has entered ramps collider. I can copy this little section here from this end quote to the plus symbol and paste it on the other two. And then, instead of the ball is inside, I'm going to say the ball is still colliding with. There we go. Now we can try that one more time. As you can see, the same thing happened. We just have a little bit more of an organized list of what is going on now. I just wanted to emphasize that it was not inside of the object, because both of the objects have a collider, so they were not inside of each other, but they were colliding with one another. And that's what I wanted to make a point of. Now, let's experiment with triggers. Click on your scenes folder, and I want you to right-click in this space, press Create, and Scene. We are going to name that Trigger Tests, and press Enter. Double-click on this scene. We want to make sure that we've saved our previous scene before we move on, so we don't lose our progress. And now you'll see we have a new scene to work with. I'm going to clear our console print statements. And in this new scene, I'm going to right-click, press 3D Object, and Cube. I am going to move it to 0 x coordinates, 0 y coordinates, and 0 z coordinates for our position. We've got 0, 0, 0. Then we are going to want to scale ours just a little bit. Go ahead and make it 2 on the x-axis scale, and scale the z-axis by 2 as well. Press Enter. We are going to rename our cube force field, because it is going to be this invisible force field. And with that said, go ahead and right-click on Mesh Renderer and press Remove Component, as well as this Mesh Filter component. Right-click and press Remove Component. So now all you have in your inspector is your transform and your box collider. Even though you can't see the cube, it's still going to act physically like the cube is there. Let's go ahead and right-click on our hierarchy, press 3D Object, and Sphere. Notice that when we are not selecting the force field, we can't see it anymore. That's okay. Bring this up a little bit and click your force field again so that we can see it. I just want to make sure that my circle is in the middle. There we go. Alright, so we have our force field and we have our sphere, which I'm going to rename ball. Then I'm going to add a new script, this time by going to the ball inspector, clicking add component, and then typing the name of the script that I would like to add, which is going to be trigger function tests. Then press enter, new script, create and add, and now we have that script attached to our object. Go over to your project workspace and click the assets folder up here, and notice that since we added the script that way, it is outside in our assets folder. I'm going to click that and drag it to scripts. Then I am going to go over with this ball game object selected to trigger function tests script. Go over to these three dots over here, click with your left click, and then go all the way to the bottom and click Edit Script. Now that we've opened our script, go ahead and go back over to your project. We are going to press this box here, is trigger. We are going to turn our sphere collider into a sphere collider trigger. Click this box and make sure it's checked. Now let's press play. Without that checked, the ball would collide with this force field. Let's press Ctrl S to save and press our play button and see if that still happens. Oh, excuse me, I've forgotten to add our rigid body. So let's press play again and click add component in the inspector of our ball game object, and let's press rigid body. Select rigid body in your list to add a rigid body component, and then now that we have the use of gravity here, press play. As you can see, the force field didn't catch it. To verify this, let's exit play mode and deselect is trigger from the sphere collider of the ball. Now let's press play. Now it collides with the force field. So the first thing that clicking is trigger does is it makes it so that the physics doesn't work the same as a normal collider anymore. Now it won't actually collide with the object, it's going to pass through. Because instead of using it in that way, you are more using it as a trigger to figure out when this ball is passing through the other object. You are not concerned about having it stop and not pass through that object when you use it this way. Let's go ahead and go to our code, and under the update function, make sure that you are outside of any of the brackets of these containers, these two containers here, the start and the update. Make sure you are under them, but still inside of your public class container. Right here is perfect. Now let's type void OnTrigger, and as you'll see here, we've got OnTrigger enter, OnTrigger exit, and OnTrigger stay. Just like with the OnCollision enter, OnCollision exit, and OnCollision stay. Let's go ahead and add all three. Void OnTrigger exit, and under that, void OnTrigger stay. There we go. Let's start with OnTrigger enter. Notice that this time, instead of using a collision type, we are using a collider type for our perimeter. And by perimeter, I just mean whatever is inside of these two parentheses here. every function has these two parentheses afterwards. You see here, start, we have those two parentheses afterwards, and update, we have those two parentheses afterwards, opening and closing. Some functions have parameters inside of those, and some do not. Instead of our parameters being of the type collision and being named collision, the default for trigger functions is using the collider, a type of collider, and naming that collider other. So very similarly to the last script that we did, you are going to type if to start an if statement, open up a opening parenthesis, close that, and add an opening squiggly bracket by pressing Shift and then the left bracket key. Press Enter to move that section down, that container down, so that it's a little bit easier to work with. And then inside of that if statement, inside of those two parentheses, we need our condition. So again, like the one before, we are going to type other is not equal, or exclamation point and equals symbol, null. If other, which is the name of our collider, is not empty, if we have a collision being detected with our collider, then do whatever is inside of this if statement. Instead of what we showed you before, now I'm going to show you how to target a specific game object that our game object is colliding with, so you can specify what you want to happen after a specific game object collides with your game object. So let's just say, with that other example, if I wanted to do something only after the ball collided with the ramp and not the floor, this would be how you did it. Let's go back to our project. Let's click force field, and let's give it a tag. Go over here to your inspector, and right here it is going to say tag, and then it's going to say untagged with a drop-down menu. Click that drop-down menu. We are going to go down to add tag. Click that, and right now our list is empty, so click this plus button. It's going to say new tag name with new tag highlighted there, and type force field and press save. Then that's not going to automatically tag your object, so make sure you are clicking force field, make sure that's selected. Go over to tag again, open this drop down menu and select force field. Press Ctrl S to save, and now let's go back to our script. Now we can refer to that specific game object by typing if other dot game object dot tag. So that is, if the collider's game object, whatever game object has this collider, if the tag is equal to, and make sure that you have two equal signs when you're doing this. When you are trying to figure out if something is equal to something else, and you are not setting that value to the object, and by that I mean you are not saying that other.gameObject.tag is being set to some specific string. You are saying if other.gameObject.tag is this specific string. That might be confusing. If that is, please ignore that bit. I don't want you to get too confused by the details as of right now because you are beginner students. But just remember that if I type a double equal sign, please make sure that you are also typing a double equal sign instead of a single equal sign. Then you want to open quotation marks. It should type both of them this time because it is after that double equal sign. Then you want to type force field, and you want to make sure that it is typed exactly the same way as the tag that you typed. See and notice how this tag is all lowercase, no spaces. This also needs to be all lowercase, no spaces, and spelled the exact same way. So far, we have an if statement saying if we get a collision, and then inside of that if statement, it's saying if we get a collision and also if that collider's game object's tag is equal to force field. And now we want to open up another opening squiggly bracket, which will add a closing, and press enter. Now, if we get past this if statement and this if statement, if we both collide with a game object and that game object's tag is force field, now it'll do whatever we type in this section here. And that is where I'm going to print that is where I am going to print something in the console. Let's type print with opening and closing parentheses and a semicolon at the very end. And then inside of those parentheses, double quotation marks, and inside of those quotation marks, ball is entering the force field trigger. Since it's guaranteed that it's going to be the force field trigger, I don't need to actually make it grab the name of the game object that it's colliding with like we did in the other script. I am just going to assume, since it's a pretty good bet to assume, that it is the force field trigger, since it already got past this if statement here. Alright, now let's press Control S, go back to our project, and let's see. Now when we press play, our ball should fall. As it enters this collider area, it's going to give us a print statement in this console here. Let's press play. There we go. As you saw, it said ball is entering the force field trigger. Let's go back. Let's click up here at the beginning of this if statement and drag to the end of the container. Make sure you're highlighting everything inside, including this other second nested if statement that is inside. Press Control C to copy. And let's go ahead and paste it in the OnTrigger exit function, but change the print statement to say ball is exiting the force field trigger. Now let's press Control S to save. Go back to our scene, and when we press play, we should get two statements, one when we are entering and one when we are exiting. As you see there, we did. Now let's copy and paste again the same selection from either of those two. Press Control C and Control V once you're inside of the OnTrigger stay. And let's write ball is staying inside the force field trigger, inside of that print statement there. Control S. Go back to your scene and let's press play again. We got what looks like 3 print statements, but was actually 17, 18, 19. There was one when we were entering, and then for 17 quick frames, our ball was inside of the force field trigger. And then, as our ball exited the force field trigger, we got another statement here. Before we leave, let me show you one fun way to interact with this force field in this scene here. Let's go back to our script. Now, under OnTrigger Stay, I want you to click at the end of this print statement, press Enter to enter a line underneath it. Let's press Enter again just so that we can be one line separated from it. It's easier to see that way. Now I want you to type this. The this keyword references this script specifically. Then period and game object. So this script's game object, period or dot, get component, and it doesn't matter if you click this top one or this bottom one, you're going to get the same result. Then you are going to want to press Shift, and where your comma is on your keyboard and your opening angle bracket, you want to put an opening angle bracket here. So it's going to add a closing angle bracket as well. It's Shift and then the button your comma is normally at to the right of your M key. Inside of those angle brackets, you are going to want to type rigid body. And basically that just is asking our code to reach into our game object and get the component rigid body. Now that we have identified what we want to modify, press the opening parentheses key and make sure there's a closing one, because this get component here is actually a function. And remember how I said functions, which are also called methods in C#, they have these opening and closing brackets no matter what, even if they don't hold perimeters in them like these ones do. So you want to make sure that those two opening and closing brackets are right there after the angled brackets and the type of component you are trying to access. Please don't worry if you are unable to understand all of this information. We are going to explain in class, but programming is like a language. It's like another language, and the best way to learn another language is to just dive in and try your best to learn the vocabulary and to learn by applying. And this, unfortunately, can be a lot when you are first starting, but you are going to catch on quickly that the only way to learn this skill is by just kind of following along with me, typing whatever I type, and trying to pick up as much as you can every time you use code. And please feel free to rewatch any of these videos as much as you want to be able to understand the different aspects that you might have missed the first time watching. After that, you want to press period, then type velocity, because we are going to be changing the velocity of our game object, specifically the game object's rigid body. When we add velocity to our rigid body, it is going to propel our object any direction that we want. And in this case, when it is inside of the force field trigger, I want it to be propelled upwards to kind of create a hovering effect. You'll see what I mean in a moment. After this .gameObject.getComponent, angle brackets, rigid body, parentheses, dot velocity. I won't be talking about my lines of code in that much depth as we move on. I just want to make sure that everybody knows every part of this line, as to avoid as many typos as possible, because typos are the biggest enemy while programming. Press plus equals. Then you are going to want to say vector3, which is the data type for the transform over here. Let me click. It's the data type for x, y, and z coordinates. So a vector3, if you had a vector3 of 1, 1, 1, that would mean the position was either x1, y1, z1, the rotation was either x1, y1, or z1, or the scale is x1, y1, or z1, depending on whether or not you're changing the scale, rotation, or position by that vector 3. That's why it's called a vector 3, because it deals with these three coordinates, x, y, and z. Vector 3 dot up is what you're going to want to click. If you hover over that, you'll see that it is shorthand for writing vector 3 and then in parentheses 0, 1, 0, which is 0 by the x-axis, 1 by the y-axis, which is going up in the positive direction, so up, not down. If it was -1, you would be going down, and then 0 for the z-coordinate. Let's press semicolon to end that line, and then press Control S. Let's go back to our scene and test that out. Press play. And now we got a hovering effect, and since I said plus equals, it is actually going to go higher and higher, until the velocity becomes too strong and breaks through before it can. Remember, it is only adding that velocity as long as the ball stays inside of that force field trigger. So if it exits, then it's going to fall through.